Greetings, loved ones. Verbal abuse is the most common way to attempt to control the behavior, thoughts, and feelings of another person. Controlling behaviors are designed to manipulate people into doing what the abuser wants them to do under the guise of love or respect or abject fear. Today we're going to talk about verbal abuse. Please help us get these messages out. Subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit the like button and notification bell, and please share these messages with others. You could save a life. So what is verbal abuse? Verbal abuse is the only type of abuse that can affect every single person with any type of communication ability or understanding. You may be assaulted by verbal abuse at work, at home, at school, on the road, or walking through a park, and there is nothing you can do to prevent it. You could even be a victim of verbal abuse if you live alone, because if your self-talk, that voice in your head, diminishes you or your belief in any way, and then you subject yourself to verbal abuse when you allow your inner critic to put you down. No one, anywhere, is immune to verbal abuse. Verbal abuse is the most common way. I'm going to say this again. Verbal abuse is the most common way to attempt to control the behavior, thoughts, and feelings of another human being. Controlling behaviors are designed to manipulate people into doing what the abuser wants them to do under the guise of love or respect or abject fear. If you define verbal abuse as name-calling delivered through speech alone, then you won't recognize it when it happens to you. But if you educate yourself on verbal abuse and its nasty symptoms, you can avoid an avalanche of future emotional pain. So let's expand our definition of verbal abuse to be any language or behavior that seeks to coerce its victims to doubt their perceptions or their abilities and subjugate themselves to the abuser. That definition of verbal abuse puts us on the right path to understanding its insidious nature. So what is considered verbal abuse? Let's think about this. Many people consider verbal abuse as blatantly offensive language designed to humiliate and gain power over another person. However, verbal abuse does not only assault us through spoken words. We read body language before we learn to speak, and our minds interpret body language into words that we internally hear loud and clear. Behaviors unique to an individual and body language understood culture-wide can translate to verbal abuse. For example, most everyone knows the words behind a blatant middle finger, and any person would interpret a strangling motion directed at them as the threat, "I want to choke you." When someone flicks open a knife to intimidate you, the words, "I'm in danger," flash through your mind. Schoolyard bullies have a look that sends the other kids running away. Veteran verbal abusers, aka adult bullies, often cultivate tiny looks and behaviors known only to them and their victim, so they don't even need to say a word to get what they want. Verbal abuse can be loud and obnoxious, like when the homeless person berates you for not giving her $1, or when your spouse uses aggressive anger and yelling to silence you. But verbal abuse is also silence, the behavior behind the silent treatment, which purposefully ignores the needs or communication of another person and quietly says, "You are not important enough to acknowledge." Verbal abuse by nature creates confusion, which many call crazy making or gaslighting. According to Patricia Evans, author of 5 books on verbal abusers master the art of confusion through using at least 15 different categories of verbal abuse. Ms. Evans' definition of verbal abuse includes the varied ways verbal abusers use to deflect accountability for their words and actions onto their victims. To accurately define verbal abuse and understand what is considered verbal abuse, we must be willing to dig a little deeper into the signs, symptoms, and effects of verbal abuse in different situations and on all people. So what to do? Mandated reporters are people who encounter children through their occupation, including child daycare providers, educators, legal and law enforcement personnel, and medical personnel. And as a missionary, I'm going to add missionaries, pastors, and church leaders. These reporters have as much of an obligation to report suspected emotional abuse as they do physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect. Even if you're not a mandated reporter and you suspect that a child is being emotionally abused, report it to Child Protective Services. A child who might be experiencing abuse needs to be evaluated by social services. Meanwhile, if you're a parent and think your child is being emotionally abused by someone else, such as a teacher, a pastor, or a coach, you need to take steps to intervene. You might need to enlist professional help to keep your child safe. If you have emotionally abused your child, or if a partner is emotionally abusive, it's important for both your mental health and your child's that you ask for help. Working with a therapist can be beneficial for you and your family. So let's talk about treatment for emotional abuse. If a child is being emotionally abused, the first course of action is to ensure the child's safety. Then appropriate treatment can begin. The abuser might require treatment, especially if it's a parent. And examples of treatment can include individual therapy, parenting classes, and social services. Those who have experienced emotional abuse can benefit from therapy with a licensed mental health professional. Once they have processed what they went through emotionally, they can learn healthy coping mechanisms, social skills, and conflict resolution. So, how do we cope with emotional abuse? Although coping with the effects of emotional abuse can take some time, there are some factors that can have a protective effect, such as having a positive relationship with another adult. For example, a nurturing parent, a grandparent, or the support of a teacher or coach can buffer some of the negative effects of emotional abuse. If you have a relationship with a child who has experienced abuse, you can help them cope by being a supportive and caring adult in their lives. Speak into their lives by spending time with them, encouraging them, and reminding them of their value and worth. Help them see that they are not defined by the words and actions of the person who is abusing them. Instead, empower them to see their strengths and to set goals for the future. If you know of a child who is being emotionally abused, or you suspect emotional abuse, it's important to let someone know your concerns so that an investigation can be conducted. In the meantime, do what you can to be an encouraging and supportive person in that child's life. Much of the damage caused by emotional abuse can be offset by the kind and empowering actions of others. Let the child know they are loved and believed in. If they learn to identify what they are good at and set goals, they can learn to offset the negative words and actions of others. According to the CDC, over half of all children in the world, this blows my mind, 1 billion children ages 2 to 17 experience violence every year. The question is not if you'll encounter a victim of violence. The question before God is, what will you do when you do encounter them? You could be the person who saves a life. You are called. We are all called to be champions for justice. If you're a victim of violence, listen to me. You are valued. You are loved. You are intelligent. And yes, most of all, I want you to know you are worthy. God does not want you to suffer violence. He wants you to live free from violence in peace and tranquility. There is a way out. It's not your fault. Abuse is not love. You are not alone. If you are suffering from violence, reach out to someone today. If you find yourself in a dangerous situation, call 911 for help. If you know of a child or another person suffering violence, tell the authorities. In our next episode, we will talk more in depth about psychological abuse. Until then, God bless you.